everyone, welcome to my channel, and today I am talking about round 1 of the Booktube prize and my experiences with the books that I had to read for it. So I am refilming this, so I hope to be able to make as much sense as I did in the first one, but I forgot to check my stupid focus again, so I was totally out of focus when I shot it the first time. And it was bugging me, so it's definitely going to bug you guys. So here we go again for discussing this. So if you don't know what the Booktube prize is, I will briefly discuss it before I go into the books. So if you do know what the Booktube prize is, I will put a timestamp in the description below so that you know when I've started talking about the books and when I haven't. I don't have physical copies of the books, so I won't be holding them up, but I will have some pictures up on the screen as well. So that's also a way in which you can see that I've started talking about it. But so the Booktube prize is a community prize. It was organized by Robert from the channel Barter Hort, but there's also a official Booktube prize channel at this point. So I'll link both channels down below. This is the second year of the Booktube prize. It is the first year that I'm participating as a judge. It's also the first year that I know of it. So I think in around October or something, Robert put out a call for judges, and I saw that video. I've never been more happy to have YouTube suggest a video to me, and so I saw that video. I was immediately intrigued and I wanted to participate. So the idea was just he made a list of all eligible books, so all books that were published in the US, originally written in English, in 2019. I don't know whether there was the exact date or whether it was just 2019 as a whole. And there are two categories for judging. There is a non-fiction category, which is new this year, and then there is a fiction category. I signed up for the fiction category just because I have more experience with fiction writing. I do read some non-fiction here or there, but like I maybe read 7 non-fictions a year or something like that, and even then I think that's too much. I maybe read like 3 non-fiction books a year or something like that. So while I think it might have been interesting to do it and to see my opinions about all of these non-fictions, I felt more comfortable with this first edition to go for fiction, and also because it's something that I'm naturally more drawn towards. It would also be something that would be that would just fit more with my reading experience. So I signed up for the fiction round. I signed up for round 1, so this is the Octafinals, where we are now. So based off of that list that was originally set up, all judges were given that list, and we had to kind of vote on the 20 books on that list that we felt had most merit. So you had to do some research to find out like what people were saying about it. If you'd already read it, of course, you could also vote for it if you felt like it had been worth it. And then based on those results, a list of 48 books that was originally in, like the original long list was selected. So those 48 books were then compiled into different groups, and then each group would have to deal with 6 out of those books, and out of those 6, the 3 best ones will advance. So I was assigned to fiction group C, and so for my group we had to read Spring by Ellie Smith, Where Reasons End by Yiyun, Frankisstein by Jeanette Winterson, The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay, Inland by Obreht, and A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. So these 6 books were the ones assigned to me, and I was originally immediately happy because out of those 6 there were definitely 2 that were high on my, like, I'm definitely going to be reading them at some point, and some that were also very much books that intrigued me, and the others were books that I had heard of. So there wasn't, I think the only book that for me was a surprise was The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay, because I hadn't really heard too much about it, and so it's a book that without the Booktube prize I would have never even gotten on my radar. But so yeah, I set out to read those 6, and my goal was definitely to like split them 3-3. I think if I'm going to go back next round, so I've signed up as well for the final round, I will try to get more into the first month. Maybe I'll even try to get all of them into the first month, because I feel with me particularly that my rating is like, my experience with the book kind of settles for a while after finishing it. So a lot of times I will so there might be books that I give a 4-star rating right after finishing it, but they stick with me, and then at the end of the year they might still make it onto my best lists of the year books, even though they only got a 4-star rating, and there are some books that I rated higher that didn't make it onto that list. So that's definitely something that I've learned out of this first round experience, that I might want to try and finish earlier in the month next time around, so that I have a little bit more time to let my thoughts about these books settle. So without further ado, let's just dive into the books. So the first book that I read 2 at the same time. I'm not entirely sure which one I really did finish first, but the first, I think, is Spring by Ellie Smith. So Spring by Ellie Smith definitely was on my radar, because I have read Autumn and Winter in this quartet. So Spring is part of a seasonal quartet that Ellie Smith has been working on. So it's sort of a project that she has of writing as close to publication date as possible. So the idea behind it is also that what she's writing about is very current, is very it's following real events very closely. And so Autumn, for example, was one of the first books that talked about Brexit. With Spring, I don't necessarily feel like it's really something that had to have been written close to its publication date. I think the themes that we are following in this book definitely do fit in with our times, but I definitely also see this book working really well later on as well. I will say this is my third Ellie Smith, so the first one is Autumn, the second one is Winter, and I don't know whether that had an impact on my reading experience, but I definitely felt like I was somewhat lost when I read Autumn. I have no memories of my experience with Winter, but with this one I really had no problems whatsoever. I was completely hooked from the get-go. I could follow along very well. I really enjoyed this experience completely, and so I was just kind of thinking that this was a more comprehensive book, but then I saw the videos of other judges who have judged these rounds, and they were all saying that they were kind of lost with this book, and I was like, what is this? So I'm not entirely sure why I had such a more comprehensive reading experience with this one. Maybe I just wasn't looking for too much in it, or maybe I just have a better understanding now of Ellie Smith's writing, or maybe the thematic of this book just really resonated with me, and that's why. But in any case, for me, this was really a book that worked very well. So I listened to it basically in one go. I was sick at the time, so I didn't really have anything else to do, and I really loved it. So it's a story in which we're following mainly 2 characters. So the first person we're following is a somewhat older guy who has just lost his mentor figure, so the person who kind of drew him into his current profession. So he is a filmmaker, and so it's kind of his mentor who he's lost, and he's kind of looking back on some experiences he's had with his mentor, and the period that they've had together, while at the same time dealing with a dwindling popularity in his career and choices about whether or not he's going to compromise his artistic vision in order to be able to do some more commercial work and be a little bit more commercially appealing, so that he can get more work done. And at the same time, we are following a second character who is a female. She is working in a sort of refugee camp facility, a sort of holding place for refugees, and she's very much become very dehumanized to the whole situation, to the way in which people are treated in there, and she seems to have she seems to just kind of see them as, objects that she has to perform certain procedures or that makes it sound weird. So she's kind of just seeing them as like part of the chores that she needs to do, without really looking at the human connection that is possible to be made there. Until one day this sort of small girl shows up in the facility. Nobody knows how she got in, and she's kind of questioning the way in which things are done and asking for a more humane treatment of the people in there. Through circumstances, she's then following that girl to somewhere else, and then we are following their journey together. So I like this book a lot. You know, I really like looking at this, at these thematics that are there throughout the story. The look at the refugee crisis and the way that we might have gotten like desensitized towards it due to like an excessive amount of exposure on the subject. And then on the other hand, I really liked also the storyline of the man, and like I like stories that look at kind of like people who've been successful in an artistic field and were kind of reaching the end of their career and also the end of their fame, and how to deal with that. What I like about Ali Smith, she's very beautiful writing, and while she brings up ideas and doesn't necessarily offer solutions, I feel like the way that she does it works very well for me, and we will see later on in this video that there are other ways of, that there are other people who in my opinion have that same style of offering ideas without giving solutions, but for me those didn't work as well. I think why it works with Ali Smith is because it's a very subtle exploration of the thematics. It's not like pushing these ideas very much into you, it's just kind of gradually exploring certain thematics and making you come to your own conclusions about them. I liked the storyline. I don't necessarily think that the ending was wrapped up perfectly, but I do think that, I do definitely want to commend it on the way it explored thematics, the way it gripped me, the way that but so yeah, it might just be that thematics for this work really worked well for me, but I definitely had a wonderful experience with this book, and it made me very very eager to get into summer, which is yet to be published at this point. So that was my first read, Spring by Ali Smith. Gave it a 5-star rating. Next up, I went to The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay. With The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay is a debut novel. I hadn't heard of it yet, and so, as I said in the beginning, so this was a whole new exploration to me. We are looking at a character, Shalini her name is, who is from Bangalore, which based on the tone of the novel seems to be a little bit more of a privileged position in Indian society. But through circumstances she goes to Kashmir, which is a region that's kind of in rebellion. It's kind of a region that needs to be subdued by the central government, and she's going there to find out. She's going there to look for a person who used to be very close to her mother. Her mother passed away, and she had kind of a very it's unclear, like her relationship with her mother was very complex, and so she wants to dive in deeper, I suppose, and so she's going back to Kashmir to try and find this person. So it's very much looking at the position of the outsider. So not only does she feel like an outsider in her own society, but she definitely becomes very much an outsider when she moves to Kashmir, and she finds it very difficult to integrate into that society, but she also finds herself very much wanting to be part of that society. She finds herself having a strong desire to stay there, even though she really doesn't really fit in, and but she does at some point contemplate leaving behind her own life and moving there. The book is very much looking at that outsider perspective and the way that she doesn't fully understand the whole the depth of the conflict that is happening there, and she will also have a very negative impact on the society there and on this conflict. I overall really enjoyed it. I enjoyed what it was doing. I think it's definitely a little bit more of a sort of commercial fiction work, but I do think it did that very well. The only thing that I would say that I didn't necessarily like about it is there were, like, the book lasted longer than it needed to last, so I feel like there's a sort of natural ending point to the book and it went on past that. And not only did it go past that, the parts that it added to the book in the end didn't really add anything to me. It just went on to show again and again how like she will never fully understand what it is like to be a Kashmiri, and that she will make the same mistakes over and over again because she is not understanding the depth of this conflict. Another part that I find, another thing that I find to be somewhat mishandled in this book is that I feel like it's very much focused on two different things. So what it was trying to talk about was about this complex relationship that Shalini has with her mother, and about her trying to go in search of answers with the search for this man who played a sort of role in their past. And then secondly, it's a little bit more about, and then secondly, it's kind of looking at this Kashmiri life and at Kashmiri society. And I feel like the focus wasn't evenly distributed between these two. Like at the very, like of course in the beginning we're not going to be looking into Kashmiri society too much because we aren't there yet, and so we don't know too much about it yet. But I feel like at a certain point later on in the novel, we also seem to be forgetting about that original pull into Kashmiri society. That seems to be like something that's no longer there. And I felt like that whole storyline of her trying to get a little bit more of a grasp on her mother and the figure of her mother should have been rounded off better, or should have been like the conclusion of the novel should have drawn back to that original quest a little bit more. And I feel like it kind of went off kilter at the end, and that it kind of lost track of what it was originally trying to do, or what in my opinion it was originally trying to do. So that's also a flaw that I saw with this. But in general, I would say that I really enjoyed reading this one. I really enjoyed the look into Kashmiri society, the complex relationships that she was having with people around her, and it was a train wreck to see her kind of destroy lives that she had grown to care about a lot. So I enjoyed that one a lot. I gave it, I think, I don't even remember at this point, but if I had to rate it now, I would probably give it like 3.5 or something, or 3 star, something like that. It was good to me, but it's also not very memorable. That's kind of what that rating represents to me. But so in any case, let's move on. The third book that I read in the month of February is A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. A Woman Is No Man is a book in which we're looking at, it's a multi-generational story in which we're looking at 3 female perspectives, and we're looking at 2 different settings. So we're looking at a Pakistani family, and so we're looking both at the time that they spent when they were still in Pakistan, and then they moved towards America, and then the final generation is then the generation that has only lived in America, that has grown up in America, but still in this very sheltered environment of a Pakistani household. I very much like this look. I always like multi-generational stories, and I very much like this look at the and I very much like this look at a secluded world that I don't know too much about. I don't know how representative I don't know how representative it is of like all Pakistani immigrant situations. Of course, there's no such thing as all Pakistani situations, so I'd be very eager to see what other people who actually have experience in this situation would have to say about it. For me, it was very interesting to look at. I very much liked the way how it wasn't, you know, we were having multi-generational tale from point of views of females. That's very much looking at the way in which females are the female role is very much suppressed within this society, in which the goal within the family is usually to get a son, because a son will stay within the family, a son will continue on the legacy, will support the family until a son will help support the family, whereas a girl will be married off and is basically a lost investment, so to speak. So while there's this very focus, there's much of it, while there's this very strong focus on the female experience, there's also not a neglect of the male perspective. We're never given a direct male perspective, and a lot of the things that the males are doing in these stories are horrible. But what she very much emphasizes as a writer is also that female struggle is a result of male struggle. The only reason why these males are lashing out on these females from time to time is because they themselves are also struggling. So it's definitely not giving a sort of like black and white view of these females are struggling because these males are holding them down. It's definitely also showing how these males themselves are also struggling under this under the expectation that their family are putting on them, and also under the restrictions that they are under. Some of these characters might want to become doctors, for example, but they need to help out in the family business. Or some might want to do the opposite. Some might have their parents pushing them to become somebody great in society, to become a very stand-out citizens, and all they really want to do is to pursue their passion, which might not necessarily be a profession that is highly looked upon. So I liked that balance was there a little bit. Definitely we were looking more at the female, but I liked the way that we're still also keeping an eye on the fact that these males are also suffering, and that the only way that they feel they can lash out is by subordinating these females even more. It was also interesting to look at it's not just these males keeping these females down, it's definitely these females going through these very same motions again, and when they become the mother figure or the grandmother figure or whatever. So it's very much looking at how these patterns that are keeping these females down are getting perpetuated throughout history, and how this is sort of a vicious cycle in which they are all trapped. They're all trapped in certain roles, roles that they might have tried to, that they might consider very unfair when they are the one being subjugated, but at a later point they also repeat this subjugation. So I thought that was very interesting to look at. I think overall the story rounded off a little bit too perfectly for me. It kind of was the ending that you as a reader want, and I as a reader am somebody who might wish for that type of ending, but I'm always very happy when a writer does not give me the ending that I want to see. So yeah, I overall had a great time with this book. It was I gave it a 4-star rating when I read it. Alright, so let's move on to the next 3 books. So in the month of March I finished the last 3 books for this challenge. So the first one that I finished up for this one is Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson, which was a book that I definitely wanted to, that I was definitely looking forward to. And so maybe my rating for that one, or my positioning for that one, has to do with the fact that it was one of the books that I was highly looking forward to. So Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson, as you can expect, is correlated to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So we're following 2 storylines. We're looking at Mary Shelley at the time that she was writing Frankenstein, and looking at her relationship with the people around her, looking at her relationship to the monster that she has basically created through her imagination. And so that was a very beautiful part in which language is very beautiful, and we were looking at the art of creation and the consequences of creations, and the way in which her creation is kind of haunting her, and this is also shown symbolically at a certain point in the book as well. So I really liked that part of the book. And secondly, we are shown a future timeline in which we are at, we start out at a sort of convention, a technology convention in which people are talking about like the creation of sex bots and stuff like that. But mainly we are there to watch a Dr. Frankisstein talk about the future for artificial intelligence. And so we're looking there at a sort of relationship between a transgender called with a transgender called Rye Shelley from Mary Shelley, and then this Professor Frankenstein. And so the second part of this novel didn't really work for me, and the whole problem that I have with this book is that it just didn't feel like one whole. There is this sort of there's this symbolic scene that I mentioned earlier that kind of feels like you cannot really place it between, you're kind of stuck wondering in which of the 2 stories you are with that scene. So I guess that scene was sort of maybe an intention to kind of blends the timelines a little bit, but for me it mainly felt like there was this one style in the old narration, a very fluid, a very literary style, and then the new narration just really didn't work for me. There was no like character development in the new narration neither, which is probably my main problem with it. The second part is very much just it just uses characters as like stereotypes, but also just as empty shells for the author to introduce certain ideas about our future, the future development of AI, and the way in which we will control bodies, need bodies in the future, and so therefore also looking at the way in the importance of body versus mind. And I felt like it was very much just proposing ideas without giving answers and without properly exploring them neither. Where I felt like with Ali Smith, she is doing a very subtle exploration of a theme, and through her writing you are made to explore, and you are exploring along with her, and while she also doesn't necessarily offer you any answers or anything like that, the way in which it is done works so much better for me and is a lot more subtle than here. I feel like she's just introducing interesting concepts but not really doing anything with it, and especially I feel like because her characters are so empty, that is what mainly makes this fail. You know, a lot of people have been talking about whether this book is transphobic or not. I don't think it's transphobic, but it's like the transgender character is as empty as all of the rest of them are, but that's definitely also harming transgender representation, because you're just giving stereotypical you're giving your transgender stereotypical situations to deal with, and you're not filling the personality of your character enough to actually make us understand anything about this character. But this is definitely a case for all of characters in this, and I must say that like there's this very long part about different types of sex bots that I don't understand why it's there. I didn't necessarily think it was added anything neither. I mean, I could see that maybe it was there for the comic part, but I was just mainly sitting there like, what am I reading? Why? I didn't think it, I thought it was okay in like the beginning, but it just dragged on for a very long time. And then the sort of like final, I don't know, 50 pages or something of this future storyline, also I just lost all interest in this storyline. And that definitely has a lot to do with the fact that I was unable to feel for these characters, because she hadn't built these characters at all. So I definitely felt like this book didn't work for me, and so I think I gave it 2-star rating. Might actually have to lower it at some point, I don't know. I could lower it, I could higher it. There are reasons for lowering, there are reasons for putting it higher up. Overall I just feel because they were such two disparate experiences, I feel like that means the book fails. You know, you can do disparate things with it, but then you need to do them super well both, or you need to somehow integrate them with each other in a way that works, and I felt like neither was successful here. I think after reading Frankenstein and reading Frankisstein right after, the one thing that could make me elevate this book is that I do think it does some interesting things with the thematics that are present in Frankenstein. But yeah, I'm not just going to put this book higher than my actual experience with it, just because I think it is an interesting dialogue with another book. So yeah, that's my experience with Frankenstein. Then I read Inland by Thea Obreht, and this book was a real problem for me. This book took me so long, I had to start my Audible subscription just to be able to find an audiobook for it, because physically I was just not getting anywhere with it. With the audiobook I was able to experience one half of this book very well. So in this book we are looking at two perspectives once again. So we are following the character Lurie, I think his name is, who is an outlaw in a sort of western setting. He is running away from the law, and he's kind of bumped into a sort of military outfit that works with camels, and we are kind of following along his journey with that camel crew and along his later developments. And then the other person we are following is Nora, I think her name is, and she is living in like some deadbeat western town, and she's going through a period of extreme drought, worrying about where she's going to get water, worrying about how she's going to take care of her family, all the while worrying about the fact that her husband hasn't returned for a while, and her sons are also missing. I think the Nora storyline is definitely very compelling, and she does a lot of work. The author does a lot of work in establishing this character and exploring this character, her motivations, her thoughts, and her experiences. With Luri, I was just never interested, and it's like, in principle, it should be an interesting storyline because you're looking at this sort of like crazy adventure of a camel crew in the West, you know, in a Western setting. It almost has like a magical realist atmosphere to it, though it is actually based on true events. But that really never gripped me. I had so much problem getting through those parts and keeping my attention focused on what happened during his parts. I think the main positive about this book is the way in which this story came together at the end. I think the ending was very well done, but I don't think it merited this book. I don't think what came before it merits getting there, you know. No matter how great your ending is, you need to be able to keep people compelled to get towards that end. And I definitely don't think that I would have done so if it weren't for the Booktube prize. And I don't DNF very easily, but I think for this one I would have definitely done so. I think the Nora storyline is very interesting, and that character development is done well, but it is also not compelling enough for me to have kept me going. I was also very annoyed with certain decisions he's making later on in the book, but I mean, a character is definitely allowed to make decisions that you don't want to make. That doesn't necessarily take away from the value of the book. But so my main problem with this one was, once again, this sort of feeling of having two different experiences with two different perspectives, and just the fact that it wasn't compelling enough. Overall, I feel like it felt more like one book than Frankenstein did, because we have that ending where everything is coming together, and we know from the get-go that they are going to come together at some point. I mean, that's just the way that books with two perspectives work. So we're kind of the one thing that was kind of driving me through this book was to see how this would end up together, and that was definitely a good payoff. So overall, I decided to put that over Frankenstein for those reasons. And then the final book that I read was Where Reasons End by Yiyun. So Where Reasons End by Yiyun sounds like it's going to be a very compelling, a very dark, a very hard-hitting book, because it's a book that is written in the aftermath of a suicide. So Yiyun Lee's son committed suicide, and she wrote this book in the period afterwards. It is not specifically about her own son, but it is a book in which she is having a female character deal with the suicide of her fictional son. So she is writing she is going into dialogue with her son who has just committed suicide, and so it's kind of like looking at possible conversations you might have with your son who has just committed suicide. I think I don't think it failed in its intent. I just don't think it had the intent of being hard-hitting. It's difficult to talk about this book because it was definitely written in a period in which she was experiencing this situation, in which she was grieving and in which she was coping with what had just happened to her. So it's difficult to talk about this as if it's not valid, because it's definitely a valid response to a situation, because it's her response to a situation. And people who have just lost their children might find themselves recognizing themselves in this situation. But as a book, I feel like at no point are you really drawn into either of these two characters, because the book does not try to draw you into these characters. It's very much just an exploration of the way in which this character is dealing with grief, but it's at no point trying to win you over to her side or to his side or show you who's to blame or anything like that. It is at no point trying to make you feel the feelings. I think there were like one or two situations in which I really felt for the mother and really felt what she was going through, but in the majority of cases I really didn't feel like you got a close look at feelings or the way in which the author was experiencing the situation. What I thought was most interesting about this book was realizing for yourself that this is not a mother talking to her dead son, this is a mother imagining the way that she would talk to her dead son. So it's very much a conversation with herself. And so it's interesting to look at, in that sense it was interesting to look at, like, if she made her son respond in a certain way, that's her interpretation of how her son would respond. So I thought that was an interesting dimension to look at, to have in the background whilst they were having certain conversations, because sometimes the answers of the son are like really harsh towards the mother, but that's actually she herself who is subconsciously putting those words in her son's head. So that is actually the things that she is thinking about herself, you know, the things that she is blaming herself for. So that I thought was interesting to look at. What I also liked was how she was kind of relearning languages, how due to this experience she felt like she needed to relearn the meanings of certain words. And so we're very much looking at words and their true meanings and trying to dig at the meaning of words or the origin of words, which I definitely thought was enjoyable and an interesting element to this story. But overall, as I said, I don't think like it did a lot to win you towards the characters. It didn't do a lot of character exploration, and so I didn't necessarily feel the point to the novel, you know. And so I had a difficult time deciding between these two, but overall I just felt like for what Where Reasons Ends was trying to do, it worked better as an overall book than Frankenstein was. The problem with Where Reasons End is that it doesn't have an ending, and that it's just snippets of this person's mind, and there is no real clue that she's working towards or anything like that, but she's also not trying to do that. But so overall what tipped that over for me is just the fact that I feel like Where Reasons Ends manages to be a better full book than Frankenstein did. And I definitely also feel like it was very much like it was indeed talking about grief in a sense. It wasn't really showing you that she was grieving, it wasn't really making you feel that grief, but it was very much in the background talking about the fear that she had of moving on, the fear of losing her son. And it was in the background there. It wasn't really highlighted or anything like that, but you could read it between the pages, and I definitely think that that was interesting and that you could definitely understand that as being a big part of the experience that people have after losing a child. And so I definitely think that Where Reasons End managed to do more justice to its... And so I definitely feel like Where Reasons End for me won out over Frankenstein just because Frankenstein for me mainly only works in correlation with Frankenstein, the book itself, and then it is too much of a disparate book. It's just too much, two different books shoved into one whole, with only one of them really having been worked out perfectly, with only one of these two actually really being worth it for me. So in the end I went with the following order. So I put Spring by Ellie Smith on top, then I had A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum, then The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay, then Inland by Thea Obreht, second to last Where Reasons End by Yiyun, and then the final one for me is Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson. If you've seen the results, I will link the video down below as well. You will know that 2 out of my top three did get through, so The Far Field and A Woman Is No Man managed to go to the next round, along with Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson. So you can imagine that I'm not entirely happy with Frankenstein making it through. But in any case, I mean, it's an interesting new style and it's doing some interesting stuff in there. I just didn't really like the way it was doing it. But so yeah, I'm still happy that those two made it through, and I'm happy to have seen that in the other groups, Lanny by Max Porter, my favorite book of 2019, made it through as well. But so yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books, what your experiences are with them, if you've participated as a judge as well, what your experiences were judging this, and feel free to link your own video down below. I will try to link the videos of the other judges in my round as well. So yeah, see you guys.